and the world. And then the First Minister goes on to say, the Queen's life was one of extraordinary dedication and service. And she said, on behalf of the people of Scotland, I convey my deepest condolences to the King and to the royal family. First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, with the statement that she issued just a few moments ago. The time is 7:20, and you're watching this extended coverage from BBC News on this very, very sad day, because we are reporting the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life over a span of 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become King Charles III. Now, within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released the formal statement. It said this: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That is the brief statement stating the events of the past hour or so and the fact of the Queen's death at the age of 96 after the longest reign in the history of the United Kingdom. And Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is with us. By now, Nick, of course, this news will be around the world. And that is why we are seeing, of course, responses from countries as far afield as Japan and the United States, and of course European countries, the European Union. Those tributes will come in. But for the people of the UK, we mentioned earlier that, of course, we were thinking about the impact on the royal family. Let's dwell then on the impact on the people of the United Kingdom, for whom the Queen has been this symbol, not just of authority, but a symbol of real solidity and of consistency over the years. Taking that symbol away, albeit with a new monarch, King Charles III, who's a very familiar figure, but taking that symbol away will have an effect on people's lives, even those who are not dedicated monarchists.
It is a huge loss, and I think many people will find it disorientating, the feeling that this person who has been such a constant presence in the background of their lives, that this person is no longer there. It is hard, really, to take it in, to speak of her in the past tense, to fully appreciate that this reign, this longest reign in British history, is finally over. I mean, so many people over the years have said, we wish she could reign forever, we wish she could go on forever. Well, clearly not possible, but that reign ended this afternoon at Balmoral. We now have both a new head of state and a new head of government in the Prime Minister. Who could have imagined that within the space of 48 hours? We will now await details of course, a state funeral, which will take place probably in about 10 days' time. That'll be the first full state funeral in the United Kingdom since that of Winston Churchill back in 1965. And Britain will mourn, and many people around the world will mourn also the passing of Elizabeth II. That presence who was there, the constant and reassuring presence, whilst so much around her changed. Every aspect of life, not just in this nation, but in every other nation around the world, has altered, but she was the one constant, dependable factor in so many of our lives, always there. If you think about the way in which this nation has changed, it was monocultural when she came to the throne, multicultural now. It was very much empire-orientated, the United Kingdom in 1952 when she succeeded to the throne. There is the Commonwealth. The United Kingdom has, as it were, dallied with Europe and has sort of moved away from it. When she came to the throne, a majority of people believed that she was chosen by God. there was still, of course, a much greater sense of deference. We're seeing some images here from the earlier stages of her life. She was, there she is, presenting the World Cup to Bobby Moore in 1966, and of course meeting so many American presidents there with the first George Bush, and pursuing her great passion of horse racing. In just so many facets of national life, the Queen was there, this dutiful figure, driven by faith, propelled by duty, with this sense of humility that we were talking about earlier. She was down to earth and straightforward, and as I said, she never let it go to her head. She realized that she was there by an accident of birth, and that she needed to win the trust and respect of her people, and that perhaps is something that not every member of her family has fully appreciated. Well, she did, in the same way that her father did, and in the same way I think that Charles has also appreciated that, because he has worked so hard. Prince Charles, you know, been a few controversies and difficulties for him, but he has set out during his time as Prince of Wales to win the respect of people and to show that he is worthy of the office and the position to which he has now succeeded. There he is with his mother. He is now mourning the loss of that mother and the loss of the Queen as he becomes king. Now, we must assume that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has not, as it were, jumped the gun in naming him as King Charles III. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but we must assume that that is correct.
Just as you speak, Nick, your timing is impeccable. Clarence House has literally, in the last couple of seconds, confirmed that it is King Charles III. So, well done on prompting that.
Very good.
Very good. So it is King Charles III, that's official. And I'm just going to interrupt a second, Nick, if I may, because Boris Johnson, who of course was Prime Minister until just a few days ago, has issued this statement. It's fairly lengthy, but I'm going to just read through it because well, you'll understand why. This is our country's saddest day, says Boris Johnson. In the hearts of every one of us, there is an ache at the passing of our Queen, a deep and personal sense of loss, far more intense perhaps than we expected. In these first grim moments since the news, I know that millions and millions of people have been pausing whatever they've been doing to think about Queen Elizabeth and about the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. These are the words of Boris Johnson. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. And Mr. Johnson says, wave after wave of grief is rolling across the world, from Balmoral, where our thoughts are with all the royal family, and breaking far beyond this country and throughout the great Commonwealth of Nations that she so cherished, and which cherished her in return. As is so natural with human beings, it is only when we face the reality of our loss that we truly understand what has gone. And it is only really now that we grasp how much she meant for us, how much she did for us, how much she loved us. Boris Johnson continues, as we think of the void that she leaves, we understand the vital role that she played, selflessly and calmly embodying the continuity and unity of our country. We think of her deep vision, her wisdom, her historic understanding, her seemingly inexhaustible but understated sense of duty. Relentless though her diary must have felt, she never once let it show. And to tens of thousands of events, great and small, she brought her smile and her warmth and her gentle humour. For an unrivalled 70 years, she spread that magic throughout her kingdom. And then Boris Johnson ends his tribute like this. This is our country's saddest day because she had a unique and simple power to make us happy. And that is why we loved her. That is why we grieve for Elizabeth the Great, the longest serving and in many ways the finest monarch in our history. It was one of her best achievements that she not only modernised the constitutional monarchy, but produced an heir to her throne who will amply do justice to her legacy. and whose own sense of duty is in the best traditions of his mother and his country. Though our voices may still be choked with sadness, we can say with confidence the words not heard in this country for more than 7 decades. God save the King. The words of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister until a couple of days ago, and I'm bound to ask Nicholas Witchell, who's with me, that is quite a contrast to the tribute, the neat and elegant and sincere tribute that the Prime Minister paid, but that is of a different order, isn't it?
There is real feeling, isn't there? There is resonance in the words from Boris Johnson. He has clearly thought about that a great deal. Yes, she seemed so timeless, he says, and that I think is what a lot of us will be feeling at this moment. And as he rightly says, we've not heard those words for 70 years, God save the King. Well, we have to adjust and get used to the reality of that situation now, because that, sadly, as we mourn the passing of the Queen, we accept that the head of state is now the King. But yes, Boris Johnson, I think, capturing in those few hundred words what so many people, so many people will be feeling just right now.
Let's bring in our home editor, Mark Easton, because Mark, you again are in a perfect place, really, given your brief, to talk a little about the change that this represents. It's been called seismic, it's been called great, it's been called fundamental. How do you read the kind of process and impact of change that the Queen's death will produce?
Well, Hugh, here at Buckingham Palace, you can see the way the public is already reacting. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people have already turned up. Applause breaking out. Just behind me now, people are pouring down the Mall, coming to pay their respects. King Charles III, as we must now learn to call him, talked about the respect and affection that the British people had for his mother. And you can feel that in the crowd here. It's a somber atmosphere. Some people, I have to say, are close to tears. This was a very personal relationship with a woman who embodied something very special about their country. She was, I think, the keystone in the nation's architecture, the solid and immovable piece that sort of defined the nation's image of itself. And that is why I think when that keystone is removed, this is a very difficult and perhaps a dangerous moment for the United Kingdom. We've talked a lot about constancy and consistency and the solidity that she brought to this country. But I think that one shouldn't think that constancy is the same as inactivity, because this was a queen like a fish swimming, keeping sort of still in a fast-flowing stream. She remained solid and still while everything was moving around her, and that required constant adaptation and change, and she put enormous thought into how she could, what she described as, ease the process of change for her people. People are arriving here. Her subjects are arriving at Buckingham Palace. Some have brought flowers already. What's interesting, I think, about this crowd, I think it says something very important about Queen Elizabeth. This is a crowd of every generation and every background. There are a lot of young people, a lot of people from ethnic minorities. It's a very mixed crowd, and she was a queen that was able to be a figurehead for people from whatever background in Britain. As I say, we've got tens of thousands of people here already. I think this is going to become the focal point for that national grief over the next few days. And we will remember, some of us, the extraordinary scenes here after the death of Diana. And I think we will see something not dissimilar with the loss of Queen Elizabeth. This is a huge moment for the country. I think it's going to be very difficult for people to adjust. I think that as well as sadness, people are feeling unsettled. And this was already at a time when there was quite a lot of foreboding about the winter to come. So I think this is going to be quite a moment for Britain and a time for people to pull together and support each other.
Mark, thank you so much. Mark Easton with some thoughts there on what this event, what this loss means for people across the UK and indeed beyond. And as we look at these images, I have to say there are lots of very heartfelt and eloquent tributes being paid here in the UK and around the world. The former Prime Minister Sir John Major calling the Queen selfless and wise with a wonderful generosity of spirit. He said he was greatly saddened the news of her death. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair, we've lost not just our monarch but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who more than any other brought our country together and kept us in touch with our better nature and personified everything which makes us proud to be British. And Mr. Blair goes on, she was not only the respected and loved monarch, she was respected because of the qualities of duty and decency and integrity and fidelity which she embodied, and loved because of the love and affection that she bestowed on us. And we will mourn her and we will miss her. That was Tony Blair speaking earlier on. Lots of other tributes from around the world. President Macron, the French president. Her Majesty the Queen embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. And President Macron says, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted queen who's left a lasting impression on her country and her century. And then President Zelensky of Ukraine, that troubled country, sending this message on behalf of the Ukrainian people. We extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire UK and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then we have the German president too, Herr Steinmeier, saying Queen Elizabeth was a woman who shaped a century, and Her Majesty enjoyed the highest respect in the whole world. A very concise statement, but one that conveys the fundamental truth about the life and the times. Let's think about the United States. There are statements from President Trump, former President Trump, former President Obama, but I've just received this from President Biden, and this has just come in from the White House. So as we look at these images of the Queen's long life from her coronation back in 1953 all the way to this year in 2022, President Biden says, in a world of constant change, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who've never known their country without her. And that is such a powerful theme today, as Nick and I have been discussing. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth, and the 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all around the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. And we see the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, and they too, with their mobile devices, will be aware of lots of these tributes being paid as they gather there. And now that the formal announcement has been fixed to the main railings in front of the palace, as it is done at times of great events like this, happy events and sad events. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all round the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. Supported by her beloved Prince Philip, the Queen led always with grace, an unwavering commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. And President Biden goes on to say she endured the dangers and the deprivations of a world war alongside the British people, and rallied them during the devastation of a global pandemic to look to better days ahead. Queen Elizabeth II, this is how he concludes, was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special, And as a concluding thought, he says this: "In the years ahead, we in the United States look forward to continuing a close friendship with the King and the Queen Consort. Today, the thoughts and prayers of people all across the United States are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief. We send our deepest condolences to the royal family, who were not only mourning their Queen, but their dear mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. And her legacy will loom large in the pages of British history and in the story of the world." I have to say, they're very moving tributes. I haven't been able to come across a few of them yet, because I know they're just waiting there for me from the Obamas and President Trump and other leaders. But they are moving, they are eloquent. And Nick, they really do stop you in your tracks. And they just underline the fact that, you know, the appreciation for what the Queen achieved and what she represented is truly global. It's not, you know, we tend to talk about the Commonwealth. Of course, that's important. It's beyond that.
As Boris Johnson said, it's only when you lose somebody that you really appreciate just who they were and how much you valued them. And the same words are in so many of these tributes: grace and duty and dignity and constancy. She was someone who personified simple qualities like decency and tolerance, who encouraged politicians to be the best that they could be, who encouraged all of us really to be the best of ourselves, because she did embody those old-fashioned concepts. And she did that for decade after decade. And she was that most important thing for a monarch. She was someone who unified people. She brought people together. And the challenge for Charles now will be to continue to seek to do the same, particularly at this moment when there are pressures within the United Kingdom against unity. And so Charles, I think, will be very much aware of the challenges that he faces and the task that he must now begin.
Well, Charles's younger son, Harry, is, we understand, arriving at Balmoral just about now. I think we're expecting the arrival in a few minutes. Here we are, the entrance to the Balmoral estate. But the Duke of Sussex, who's travelling alone, we believe, because his wife, Meghan, is not accompanying him. But he's arriving. He didn't come with the main royal party earlier, with the Duke of Cambridge, his brother, and with Prince Andrew and with Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. He wasn't with that group. They flew up to Aberdeen quite a few hours ago, and they've been in Balmoral since then. They joined the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, who were already there at the Queen's side. So Prince Harry's arrival is considerably later than that. And indeed, it's quite a while after the official announcement of the Queen's death at the age of 96. But we understand that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way there, and he's about to arrive at Balmoral at this time, where he will join the other members of the royal family. And as we've already heard, the King, King Charles III, and the Queen Consort, they will be staying at Balmoral tonight. They're not returning to London tonight. We had that statement earlier from the King. And they will be returning to London tomorrow. We've also heard from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who paid her tribute to the Queen and thanked her for a lifetime of service, and reflected indeed the great sense of national sadness at the news that came today, because although the Queen was 96 and had health problems, these images will tell you everything about recent years, where of course she's really just done her best to carry on despite advancing years and health problems. And she and Prince Philip, who left us 2 years ago, were full of the joys during those Jubilee celebrations. And now we have some of the tributes already arriving. And they'll be arriving, of course, at Balmoral. They'll be arriving at Buckingham Palace. They'll be arriving at Windsor. So these will be local people who are used to the royal presence in Balmoral. They are very used to seeing the royal family around in these summer months. They know full well how fond the Queen was of Balmoral as a home and as a base. And they will be wanting to pay their respects as locals who tended to leave the royal family alone because they were used to seeing them around, and the Queen certainly felt very much at home there, having spent so many years there with her family and indeed with her parents when she was growing up. So sometime along this road we're expecting Prince Harry to arrive. It's going to be in probably one of those vehicles that we saw earlier, maybe a Range Rover or something of that kind, but they're still expecting his arrival there. And he will, of course, join the rest of the family, and they will no doubt be reflecting on the loss that they've suffered. They'll be sharing the sense of grief, and they'll be thinking as well about what the future holds with the new king, King Charles III. As Clarence House has confirmed, he wishes to be known King Charles III, who will be reigning with his Queen Consort Camilla, and thoughts already will be turning respectfully, sensibly but respectfully, towards the events of the next few days, leading of course to the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth, which will take place in probably 10 days' time, but we need to have that confirmed. The plans, of course, have been there for a long time. They always are. They've been revised over the years because that's how these things work. But they will need to be finalised given the circumstances because, of course, the Queen has passed away at Balmoral in Scotland and not at Windsor, not at Buckingham Palace. So the arrangements will inevitably be adjusted in the next few days in the lead up to the state funeral itself. So there'll be some talk about that, and it's fine for us to talk a little bit about that, but what we're really doing today is reflecting on people's sense of loss and what's happened today, and the fact that British life has changed, the fact that the course of our history has changed, and that is symbolised by Buckingham Palace and that empty balcony tonight where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions, on so many happy occasions indeed, during Jubilees and the end of the Second World War with her beloved father and mother and sister Margaret. So it's been the scene of so many great national events when the crowds congregate around that palace to declare their support for the royal family or indeed to express their sympathy in bad times. And the crowds are now building up. The news, which came a short while ago, clearly filtering through, and lots of people now wanting to just stand at the palace, look at the palace, want to be seen at the palace to express their sense of loss and to express their sense of sympathy with the royal family, with King Charles on the loss of his mother, and of course with the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, who've also lost a mother, and the Duke of Cambridge, who's lost his grandmother, as has the Duke of Sussex, who's on his way to Balmoral. Of course, a grandmother and a great-grandmother too. So there's generations of the royal family affected by the news today. That's before you start thinking about friends of the royal family and about generations of people in the UK who've known nothing else. You'd have to be in your 80s, basically, to be in any position to say that you could perhaps remember a time when the Queen wasn't sovereign, wasn't the monarch. And here we have dusk in London and the Queen Victoria Memorial glinting in the evening light, with the crowds gathering around that memorial and congregating at the gates and the railings of Buckingham Palace. The palace, which is, of course, the symbol of the royal family in central London, but is not the usual residence of the royal family. That is Windsor Castle, which is usually a short ride away in a helicopter or indeed a car. And the Queen used to be very familiar with that journey, being ferried back and forth from Windsor to Buckingham Palace for the business of the day. And then, of course, Buckingham Palace, the great backdrop for so many of the huge ceremonial and state events that we are familiar with. And they include the Queen's Birthday Parade, which will become the King's Birthday Parade when that next happens, and that famous processional route along the Mall all the way to Horse Guards Parade, with the Queen until the mid-1980s was on horseback. She loved the horses, of course, as we know, not just riding, but also the horse racing, on that processional route for so many birthday parades, and indeed was in a position to enjoy the end of the parade in 2022 for the Platinum Jubilee. So many happy memories, and the crowds gathering are aware of them, but on a day when they're reflecting on a huge loss in our national life, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, who's died at the age of 96. I'm in a position to tell you what the leader of the opposition has been saying. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has issued his own statement in the past half hour or so. We mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign, says Sir Keir. It's a deep private loss for the royal family, and all our thoughts are with them at this time, and the nation shares in their grief. We will always treasure Queen Elizabeth II's life of service and devotion to our nation and the Commonwealth. Our longest serving and our greatest monarch, says Sir Keir. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon. As Britain changed rapidly around her, this dedication became the still point of our turning world. So as our great Elizabethan era comes to an end, we will honour the late Queen's memory by keeping alive the values of public service that she embodied. For 70 years, Sir Keir Starmer says, Queen Elizabeth II stood as the head of our country. But in spirit, she stood amongst us. Yet another moving tribute from our leaders there, one from Boris Johnson earlier and Liz Truss, and this one from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. There are others too, of course, from President Biden, President Obama, former President Trump, President Macron. All of these tributes coming in, all of them worth reading. They will no doubt be on the BBC News website for you to see, to just keep up with the tributes being paid, because they are moving, they're eloquent, and they are thoughtful. And it's well worth you having a look if you have a moment to do that. Now, you're watching BBC News, and this extended coverage continues this evening on the 8th of September 2022, because Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, the commanding presence in British public life for a span of 8 decades. The flags have been lowered at Buckingham Palace. The Queen died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has formally become King Charles III. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Charles, the new King, said this: "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." It's coming up to 8 o'clock in the evening. The lights are on in central London. The flags have been lowered. The crowds are gathering around the memorial by Buckingham Palace. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, still with me. And up at Balmoral, we are in a position to say that Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is either just about to arrive or has just arrived. He's certainly within minutes of arriving at Balmoral Castle itself. Some of the vehicles now pulling up, and they are the advanced vehicles, and there's the vehicle, the cavalcade, moving its way into Balmoral Castle itself, and we believe that is Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. And Nick, you're watching this with me, and that means that Harry has now joined his brother
Yes.
and his father and other members of the family.
Yes, as autumn descends on this bleak September day, there at Balmoral and also at Buckingham Palace, how striking are those images outside the palace, people feeling the need to come together at this moment in the nation's history, the day on which the Queen of the last 70 years has passed away. People need, I think, just the solace, the comfort of being with other people. The nation will begin its mourning, bells will be rung and guns will be sounded and church services will come together. I remember the words that were used, I think, by a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, who talked about service untiringly done, duty faithfully fulfilled. Everyone will have their words about the reign, the duty of Elizabeth II, as we all just pay our tributes now to a life of duty, of humility, of decency, as the process, the transition of this new reign gets underway. And I expect we will hear from the new king tomorrow. There will also, of course, be an accession council when the Privy Council comes together. Not the full Privy Council, because there simply isn't room these days, but they will come together and they will confirm the succession, and they will, I imagine, at some point hear from the new king. And those statements by him will be important to set the tone for his reign, paying tribute to his mother on behalf of his family and the nation, but also setting out his aspirations, his wish, his ambition to be a force for unity and continuity and stability at a time when stability perhaps is in rather shorter supply than it has been at many other times. It is unsettling, as Mark Easton said. It is disorientating, and many people will feel that, and they will need to be reassured at this moment.
Nick, thanks again. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, with some thoughts there on the significance of today and the loss that people have suffered today and the country has suffered, and the fact that we no longer have a queen. We have a king, King Charles III, who has acceded to the throne immediately, the moment that his mother passed away. Lots of tributes which we can still share with you from political leaders, from religious leaders. For example, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who saw the Queen so many times, of course, during her period as Prime Minister, simply said this: "I want to place on record," says Theresa May, "that Her Majesty devoted herself unreservedly to a life of service." And that really does echo what so many others have been saying. It's interesting as well that the Duke of Cambridge, a new title, the Duke of Cambridge, the Duchess of Cambridge, William and Kate, of course, now being referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. So we'll see lots of these adjustments as the evening goes on. And here on BBC News, we will, of course, be bringing you more tributes from around the world and reflecting what people in communities across the United Kingdom are saying tonight after the death of the Queen. We'll take a pause for now. We'll be back for an extended edition of BBC News at 10, but we're going to join my colleague Clive Myrie now for more special coverage following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Goodbye for now.
The longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II, has died at the age of 96.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. God help me to make good my vow.
Over the course of 8 momentous decades, she witnessed social and economic change on a global scale. As Princess Elizabeth of York, she came to the throne at the age of 25, following the sudden death of her father, King George VI. During her lifelong reign, the Queen dealt with no fewer than 15 prime ministers, the first, Sir Winston Churchill, through to Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair and Boris Johnson. As head of the Commonwealth, she became the most travelled monarch in history, head of state of 15 countries at the end of her reign. The Queen's death comes just over a year after the passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, her consort for more than 70 years. Over the decades, the Queen was greeted by millions of people worldwide and met her subjects on thousands of engagements in the UK and well beyond. She was last pictured at Balmoral on Tuesday, asking Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, as the crown passes to a new king, Charles III, the Queen's death will be deeply felt by her family, by people across the United Kingdom and millions around the world. Good evening. The reign of the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom has come to an end with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace made the announcement just after 6:30 this evening. The Queen, who was 96, passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Members of the royal family had made the journey there on the news she was gravely ill. The Queen had been a commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades, and her eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become King Charles III. Buckingham Palace had issued this statement: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, in the last hour, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement: the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. Well, joining me now is Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent. Nick, I am 58 years of age. I've known no other monarch. And there are millions of people, we'll show the pictures a little bit later on, millions of people around the country, thousands outside Buckingham Palace, some outside Balmoral as well. They have known no other monarch either. This is a moment of profound change as well as profound sadness.
It is. It's a massive moment for the country, and I think people are just taking it in, absorbing it, and I would imagine that many millions of people are very emotional about this. The tears will flow in many households tonight as they just take in the news that this figure who has been there throughout most of our lives, in the background to our lives. I'm nearly 70 and I too have only ever known Elizabeth II on the throne. But the transition will take place. We have a new king. The crown passes imperceptibly, invisibly, immediately. He doesn't have to be sworn in. There doesn't have to be any ceremony to ensure that he is the new monarch. He is, as soon as one monarch dies, the crown passes. There will be challenges for him, there is no doubt. Anyone succeeding to such a huge figure who has occupied the throne for so long would face quite a challenging time to take up and pick up the threads of the constitutional monarchy in this country. But I think that this nation is, at its heart, feels very comfortable with the monarchy. Not everybody does. There are many people, of course, who don't, but the overwhelming majority do. And I think that Charles will rely on those instincts and the efforts that he will make in coming days to reassure people that he will reign in the style of his mother. There will be some differences because each monarch has an element of their own personality. He will be, I think, slightly more proactive than she was. But that's all for the future, really. Tonight, millions of people in this country and around the world will be reflecting back and feeling a deep and profound sadness, will be just appreciating what it is that has been lost to the United Kingdom. The monarch who has been so dutiful, who has embodied all the best of qualities of tolerance and decency, who has stood for unity and constancy and continuity. That reign has ended. And it is a moment of great sadness and solemnity for the United Kingdom.
For the United Kingdom and indeed her own family. Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our Scotland editor, James Cook, who is at Balmoral for us now. James, what can we say, really? Members of the family are there, and by Her Majesty's bedside when she passed away, we assume. Are all the immediate members of the family now with you?
Yes, the senior royals have all arrived here. Within the past half an hour or so, the sun, shrouded in cloud, set here on the Balmoral estate, setting too on the end of an era for the United Kingdom and for the world. And minutes after it did so, a car swept through the gates, several cars in fact, one of them we believe containing Prince Harry, to join his brother Prince William and his father the King in mourning for Queen Elizabeth, a monarch who has a special place in the heart of this nation, but who in return had, in her own words, a deep and abiding affection for Scotland. A moment, of course, here, behind these gates, for a family, first and foremost, to mourn, but a moment, too, for a nation to reflect on an extraordinary reign and on the end, the severing of links with the Second World War, the existential threat to this country which this nation survived, and also to the British Empire, which in many ways the Queen embodied for some of her reign. She also, I think it is fair to say, embodied the union of the crowns between Scotland and England, that union dating all the way back to 1603.
James, thank you. Our Scotland editor there, live at Balmoral. We can go now to Mark Easton, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us. Now, Mark, we were seeing a little bit earlier some of the pictures of the crowds gathered where you are, many of them having been there in the rain throughout much of the day on the news that the Queen was gravely ill, and now many more people have turned up on the news that she has now passed away.
Yes, absolutely, Clive. People are seeking some way of connecting with this extraordinary moment in British history, and despite the rain, which is really quite heavy now, there are tens of thousands of people outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been growing over the last few hours, people streaming down the Mall. In the Mall as well, we've got a line of black taxi cabs, the cabbies wanting to pay their tribute. It's a very respectful, very sombre scene. You'll see quite a few camera lights are on, but I've also heard applause, and even at one point 3 cheers. Now, we don't know whether those were moments where the crowd wanted to show their appreciation for the Queen that they have lost, or whether they were perhaps greeting their new king, King Charles III. But whichever, it is a crowd which wants to be part of this moment. And it is a huge moment, I think, Clive, for this country, because the Queen was this solid, immovable piece of the nation's architecture, the keystone. And without that, there will be a sense, I think, of unease, of uncertainty. And it is in a moment when people will want to come together, will want to be with others, to share this moment and to see it through.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there at Buckingham Palace this evening, where crowds have gathered and have been gathering throughout the day. If you are just joining us, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and a commanding presence, of course, in British public life over 8 decades. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, and she was aged 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. Our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, now looks back on today's events.
Tuesday, the 6th of September, the last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen as tributes began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen, above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development, before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospice in Berkshire. But these kind of visits had become rare over the past year, as the Queen relied on her walking stick, her mobility compromised. The royal household had tried to adapt to keep her active and visible. A golf buggy at the Chelsea Flower Show helped keep the Queen comfortable. But she had become noticeably thinner and frailer, something that severely limited her involvement in her own Platinum Jubilee celebrations, with her family increasingly representing her. At the weekend, her son stood in at the Braemar Highland Games, always a favourite event for the Queen that she reluctantly missed. Like so much of her life, the decline in her health was played out in public. Duty may have got harder to manage physically, but mentally, even emotionally, the Queen remained engaged and working to the very end.
Daniela, Ralph, with a sum up there of the events of the day. We're now joined by the former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir John Major. Sir John, it's very good of you to join us here on BBC News at this moment in time. Fears, of course, had been mounting throughout the day on the news from the Queen's medical team at Balmoral. What are your thoughts now on the passing of Her Majesty?
Well, it is heartbreaking news. It's news that one day we knew we would have, but we always hoped it would be delayed and would be some way away. It's very hard to take it in, that radiant smile which lights up a room and lights up a country is just not going to be live for us there anymore. Very hard to imagine. Most of the people in this country can remember nothing other than the Queen as monarch. Many of those who are elderly remember faintly the former king. But this is an enormous change for this country. It's a very big moment in history, a key pivotal moment. And I think there will be many tears shed tonight and over the next few days for Her Majesty the Queen.
I wonder, Sir John, given your interactions with the Queen, obviously as Prime Minister, what your personal recollections are of meeting her?
There are so many recollections, and in many ways so different from what people might imagine. The private meetings that the Prime Minister has with the Queen, which are perhaps scheduled for 45 minutes, in my experience never lasted remotely under an hour and often some way beyond it, which weren't entirely serious matters, just discussing the